play. And another foul on board. His third for setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen.
Pick and roll. And a foul. Offensive foul coming up. Ken Valentine standing right there.
Izzo dying for a moving screen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Moving Screen Take Two. We failed completely at recording this podcast on Sunday night, so we are diving into it on Monday morning. It is March, and we're making the kind of mistakes that teams aren't supposed to make in March. Brendan, how are you doing today?
This is the bizarro world. I figured since we're doing the same show twice, we had to at least switch it up because it would really just be a mind melt otherwise. So that's it.
Keeping everyone on their toes.
Dylan with the intro. I think you did a great job, pal.
Thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, this was leaving your man on a switch. You know, this is just a really bad mental mistake.
Can't have it.
Can't have it on March 1st. But today is March 2nd, and we're moving forward.
How do you botch a podcast when we've been recording podcasts every week for the entire season? Not great.
Not great. This was your press conference penance right here. All right. Do you do the sales pitch too?
Well, if you've made it this far, you hopefully know what you're getting. We're here to talk Michigan State hoops. If you enjoy the podcast, please rate, subscribe, review, all that good stuff. And make sure you sign up for The Athletic, where you can find Brendan's work, and UM Hoops, where you can find my work.
Great job. Making up for it by the minute. All right, let's get into Michigan first.
Yeah, let's get into it again.
I am still in Columbus on my way to State College for a game at Penn State. But, yeah, it was a not a good trip to Columbus for Michigan. This is hard. We literally had the same conversation last night. But I tried to kind of frame this thing as when I looked at the Wisconsin game, okay, they're without Eli Brooks. Wisconsin was white hot, shooting the ball. Demetric Trice was outstanding. And you kind of say, okay, sometimes you have to tip your cap to the other team, blah, blah, blah. Yesterday, while they're on the road, and while Ohio State is playing probably as one of the top 15 teams in the country, basically right now, just in terms of its performance in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I think you wanted to see a little bit more out of Michigan. I think you wanted to see fewer mental lapses on the defensive side. And, you know, they made a lot of pushes. They responded a lot of times when Ohio State tried to run away, but they just couldn't get the stop after the stop to actually push ahead or make a run at actually winning this thing. And then it kind of just got away from them at the end there. What was your take?
Yeah, if you think back to Michigan's win at Purdue, I think we talked about how Michigan had done such a good job of sort of containing runs, not giving up any long extended runs, and that's really key. I think they did the same thing against Michigan State, where it was like a 5 or 6 point. There was never a run more than a couple possessions. Ohio State had a 13-2 run, 12-2 run, and a 13-2 run on Sunday against Michigan, and those 5-minute, 3-minute stretches where Michigan kind of just loses track of the game defensively are the things that you can't have if you want to win consistently. To Michigan's credit, they put together a really good run to close the first half and start the second half, and they even played their way back into the game to tie it up at 54, I believe, before everything kind of went sideways. So Michigan showed those flashes, but if you can't consistently get stops and you're going to go 10 of the last 11 possessions of the game and get I don't know what you're doing over there. If you're going to give up those defensive runs, you're not going to be able to win on the road against a team that is competent.
Yeah, I actually thought Michigan was going to win the game until those back-to-back Wesson threes, and then it was kind of you realized that Ohio State was going to make every play to win that game. One of the interesting things, talking to Franz Wagner after the game, and he talked about the exact quote was something like, we're at a time of year where we need to stop taking plays off. And I asked him to define that because it's not as if I don't think anyone would accuse Michigan of, a lack of hustle or something like that. And that's what you might think of when you hear something like take a play off. And his was, no, it's, we string together a few minutes of really good play, and then we get down and we just have a total mental lapse on the defensive side. People just stop talking. Like he blamed himself on one point for just getting lost on a switch. And I think that was that Wesson straight on banger that he hit from the top. It wasn't one of the banks. It was one that one he was just wide open and he nailed it. He took responsibility for that. And he was just like, I don't know why that continues to happen. And it's, this game was played on March 1st, and you just want to see, you would think that a team of this quality would be kind of beyond that. And I think that's where everyone thought as of a week ago.
Yeah. And to play defensively, like great defenses do their job consistently, and like other teams will make shots, right? Like there will be variance in the results, but if you are a great defensive team, you're solid every possession, and you don't give away those 5 or 6 plays where you completely have a mental breakdown and just botch a play, right? Like that's what you can't afford to do if you're going to be a great defensive team. And I think Michigan definitely did that in both games this week. And you can't just wave a wand and say, oh, well, Eli Brooks was out for this game or any of these other things. Like there are some issues that Michigan has to figure out defensively right now after 2 games where they gave up double-digit threes for the first time all season, right?
Yeah, and we talked about it a week or so ago when they were on that string of really good defensive performances and were right near the top of the conference in defensive efficiency basically for a span of 4 weeks or so. And we went back and forth on, is this a product of the schedule? Because a lot of those performances were Rutgers, Purdue, right? So on and so forth. There's kind of teams that are not exactly going to go and put 1.1 or 1.2 points per possession on you. And lo and behold, they play 2 teams that are legit NCAA tournament teams right now, Wisconsin and Ohio State, and the defense got torn up a little bit. So the answer we concluded last night is, like usual, somewhere in the middle. But my question would be, is it in the middle good or is it in the middle bad?
Yeah, you don't really know, right? Like that's why Michigan winning those 2 games at Rutgers and Purdue was so important, and it's also why losing these 2 games is frustrating. This is a really hard stretch of schedule. We talked when Michigan was 7-7 after the Indiana win, and we were talking about what would a good finish be over the final 6 games. And I think we kind of said if Michigan can figure out how to go even 3-3. That's a good closing stretch considering how difficult those games are. There's really only one gimme game in that stretch. And they won those first 2 games, and people started kind of recalibrating expectations as far as, oh, well, now can they close 5-1, 6-0, 4-2? There's still tough games. Like it's not like Michigan's dropping games to teams like even like a Minnesota or teams that aren't going to make the NCAA tournament or teams that aren't even playing well, to be honest, right? Wisconsin and Ohio State are playing as well as anyone in the Big Ten right now, and Michigan fell victim to that. And I think the bigger issue for Michigan is Michigan didn't play particularly well. And if you play well and lose a game at this point in the season, you can kind of shake it off and say, okay, whatever. But to not be at your best, to be giving up those possessions defensively like Franz talked about, or to just not look completely dialed in, that's what's scary, because if you're not dialed in 2 weeks, your season's over, right? So that's what Michigan has to figure out, is how does it get to a point where, okay, we're confident how we're playing, we're connected, we're basically where they were a week ago. And all that isn't lost in 1 week. It's still there. It's just the results make it very hard to see beyond that in any one flash of time in this season.
Right, because a lot of this needs, some level of perspective. And the problem is I'm not sure there are variables that I don't know if you can exactly project how they're going to turn out. Number one being, what is Isaiah Livers right now? Because we're both in agreement that he does not look 100%. I think that if I recall him saying something to the extent of like, I'm probably not going to be fully healthy at any point. I think he said that in an availability.
He definitely said that at some point.
And that's probably right. You know your body, you trust your body. What can he get back to being the guy who was, a legitimate leading scorer for this team, a guy who, was a difference maker both defensively and with his 3-point shot? Because right now it's just not the same player. Eli Brooks is obviously playing with a mask right now. Is that going to affect his 3-point shooting? Is that going to affect his offense in any way? You don't know that. And how long does he have to wear that thing? You don't know. It makes it really hard. As you mentioned last night, the great Elixir is coming up right now with a game against Nebraska. But, that's kind of a, you hope some guys can see some shots go in and kind of get things going a little bit. Because right now, this team looks a lot like Xavier Simpson doing his thing and Franz Wagner taking his game to another level. And you just want to see everyone else kind of get back to where they have been at other certain points this year, because that's when they're really good.
Yeah, hold on. You put a lot out on the table there. That's
what I do.
Let's start at the top with Isaiah. He had a tough
I've had a lot of coffee this morning. This is why you want me potting late at night when I'm sleep deprived with a couple beers in me, right? I'm a little more low key. I get a little high strung in the morning. So
let's take a deep breath. And Isaiah Livers is the X factor for Michigan, and I think this week showcased a couple things, potential issues with him in his current state. Both Ohio State and Wisconsin played fairly perimeter-oriented 4-out looks and put a guard or a wing on Livers, basically on both ends, right? He defended him with a guard and forced him to defend a guard. He really struggled containing the dribble defensively against smaller players, and I think to me that looks like an issue with the ankle or just like his movement, right? Like he looks a little gimpy in that sense. Mm-hmm. And that is a big part of Michigan's defensive issues right now. I think if you can't contain the dribble one-on-one, you're going to have issues, especially against a team that can spread the floor, because then you're trying to send more help. You're trying to do this. Offensively, his performance at Ohio State reminded me a lot of the game at Louisville, where he was guarded by a smaller player again and kind of tried to go to all these post-up ISOs and different things facing up, and just that's not really his game. And he struggled there, and I wouldn't worry that he's 4 of 15 over his last 3 games from 3. Like that, his shot will come. Mm-hmm. That's probably the least concerning thing, but I think it's his defensive ability, which ties pretty closely to his health. And then,
well, hold on. With the 3-point shoot, I would tend to agree that he'll go back to the mean at some point. But at the same time, if you're not trusting your ankle, it does change the way that you take off and land when you are a jump shooter. So, if that ankle is a little wonky, fair, it does affect your shooting.
Jump shot coach over here, right. But I agree. Right. So I think the defensive issues and the mismatches against small teams are things that Michigan kind of has to figure out, because there's a good chance you're going to play a 4-out team somewhere along the way, right? And
yes,
it's great that he can exploit a mismatch against a bigger player, but Michigan needs to get dialed in with that position, because there's not really another option, right? Brandon Johns is not going to be a better option to defend a 4-out team. Colin Castleton saw some time at the 4. That's not really a better option against a perimeter-oriented team. And the other option would be, I guess, 3 guards and Franz, which we haven't really seen much of in weeks. So that is where I'm at with Livers. Do you think it's a health thing? Do you think it's a confidence thing? I mean, he did sit out for like a month, right? So there's going to be some time to get back in to what I guess he is as a player.
Yeah, I mean, I think chalking it up to rust or whatever is certainly logical and plausible. The thing is that when it's so hard to gauge, because like when he did come back after injuries, he just like was the same guy. It was pretty.
His first 4 games
incredible.
Were great,
right? He missed the one game, came back against Purdue, scored 19, and looked great. There was that 3-game stretch between the 2 injuries where he kind of popped right back into the lineup and did his thing. Even the game that he re-injured himself when he landed on that dunk, he kind of came in and it didn't look like there was that much rust. So, yeah, it's hard to gauge kind of what's going on right now. It really could be matchup-based. Go ahead.
Purdue, Indiana, Michigan State all tend to play bigger at the 4. they don't have a 4-out sort of look, and Northwestern is just Northwestern. So those are better matchups for him, and it's hard to kind of piece apart how much of it is the matchup and how much of it is his health, right? I mean, that could be the underlying issue there.
Agreed. My timeline my mentions are filled with people complaining about John Teske. What do you see there?
Michigan 100% needs John Teske on the court almost all the time because he's that important defensively. I don't think it's any coincidence that he picked up his 4th foul shortly after Michigan had tied the game, and then the Ohio State scored on 10 of 11 possessions in a row. Mm-hmm. He keeps everything together. Obviously, is he the best offensive big in the conference? Is he a top 5 offensive big in the conference? No. Do you wish he was making more 3-point shots? Do you wish he was finishing a little better? Sure. But Michigan's defense just goes off the rails, especially against a pick and pop type of big man when Austin Davis is on the court instead of John Teske. I don't think there's any debate there that he's that important to the defense. Do you agree with that or no?
I completely agree with that, yes. I mean, all people see are, is his offense. That's the only thing people are seeing right now. And it's this, he's taken so many steps back because he's not finishing. And I feel like, in the beginning of this year, we had this conversation. And you talked about the fact that, he's not really a back to the basket type of guy. I mean, I think that he did better than anyone probably thought he was going to do early on this year, but that's really not his natural spot. His finishing at the rim in past years was catching rolls and dunking the ball. It was not planting a foot, pivot, finish over one of your shoulders or something like that. So there's this, they continue to lean on him for post touches. What I'm kind of curious about is the amount that they still lean on him for some of these touches when they're just not high value possessions at this point. I'd rather have Franz Wagner taking 13 threes than some of these looks.
Yeah, I think we talked last night on the pod that will never be mentioned again, but Michigan still goes to John Teske in the first possession of every single game, and it has not been particularly effective. At this point, I think you just got to keep doing that because what are you going to say? We don't trust you anymore, John? I feel like it's almost like that's the point of that, in my opinion, is just what Juwan Howard believes you need to start the game with is trying to establish the post. I guess the risk of that is sometimes the post gets established in the other direction, right?
Right.
If you can't establish yourself, it's a confidence blow early in the game.
And these teams have film, and they know probably, anyone that's worth the damn probably knows what's coming. But go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that all of the bigs in the Big Ten are going to benefit from getting out of the Big Ten.
Yes.
These guys it's a depth of big men in this league is just ridiculous. And it's going to be pretty apparent when you come in the NCAA tournament, and most teams don't have bigs that are as versatile as Daniel Oturu or can shoot threes like Caleb Weston or can defend every position like Xavier Tillman. Every night you're going against one of the best bigs in the country, and I think that is something you have to keep in mind because Teske was a good post-up player early in the year when he was going against bigs that weren't great, right? And you also have to think about it like this. Last year, John Teske struggled to post up 6-foot guards on a switch. He struggled to establish position and even catch the ball when teams would switch ball screens. He's definitely improved in terms of his back-to-the-basket game. It's just how many touches per game. I think the balance is 3 or 4. It seems like a reasonable thing. It's not like they're going to him 8, 9 possessions in a game.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Anything else on this game before we kind of look at the week ahead?
I think we should talk a little bit about Franz. You kind of just glossed over it, but second KenPom MVP game in the last 3 games. He hit big shots. He is incredible defensively. His defense gets better every game, and just the deflections he gets, the help side plays he makes. If there's still a way, if Michigan can, you talked about guys figuring out how to get back to, I guess, what they were at other points in the year. Franz Wagner is a different player than he was at any other point in the year. So that still gives Michigan, I think, some upside with how he's playing. He's starting to shoot better from three. He looks more confident. He hit those back-to-back threes and was just yelling at the entire arena.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he can change this team, I think, still in March. And I think he's just showing something new every game.
No, I totally agree. He is playing at the level right now of like a second-team All Big Ten player. Essentially, if you just take the last month, that's pretty much where he is. Second or third team guy. And if not for him right now, considering some of the difficulties being had right now, I'm not sure where this group would be. Like, he has lifted the entire ceiling of the team.
Yeah, and I guess I would also say when we did this podcast probably in December, we were saying, well, if this guy can ever get it, he is the ceiling of the team. So on one hand, you could say everything's sort of coming together for Michigan. On the other hand, you could say this was a not great week in a time when you'd really like to have won that game against Wisconsin, and you feel a lot better about yourself. Big picture, I feel like it's just about aligning the pieces just the right way when it matters most at this point. And that's 2 weeks away. This week coming up, they host Nebraska on Thursday and go to Maryland on Sunday. What are your expectations for that stretch?
Nebraska, if you're Michigan, you just want to see guys kind of get their mojo back and get confidence and kind of put that last week behind them. Winning can do that kind of in a snap. So you hope that you go out and perform well and kind of get that taste out of the mouth. The Maryland game, I know you kind of, in terms of if these two were meeting on maybe a neutral floor, you kind of like how Michigan matches up with Maryland. It's a big ask, though, to go into Xfinity Center on senior day for Anthony Cowan and get a win in a game that for Maryland might have a conference championship on the line. Like, that could be a game Michigan can go and play really well and lose. So it's another 5-out team. Jalen Smith can bring you out to the perimeter. Will be a good test for the mistakes that have been made against teams like Ohio State and trying to figure out what is the solution if you run into a team that looks like this on the first week of the NCAA tournament. Because you can play a mid-major that plays 5-out and suddenly it doesn't matter how good Michigan is if you can't defend basic actions. So, they can at least get another look at themselves in a situation like that. And, a 1-1 week is probably on the table, and then you go from there.
Yeah, Maryland is just so tough because they obviously have the record. They are in control of their own destiny to win the Big Ten outright, but I don't think anyone loves this team. They're a spread team that shoots a bunch of threes and struggles to make threes. They're inconsistent. They've needed crazy comebacks to beat Northwestern and Minnesota over the last month. They had that crazy win at Michigan State, but were really out. Like, they lost that game and then stole it at the end, right? So I don't think you'd say Maryland is one of the hottest teams in the Big Ten, and I think the pressure is going to ratchet up there this week, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out. But again, can Michigan defend a pick and pop big? It has been a big issue over the last week, as we've seen, and that is something that you're going to face against the Anthony Cowan, Jalen Smith ball screen duo, right? Like, that's what they do.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to kind of see Michigan's defense across the board in this game. Michigan State, one of the great things that they were able to do in that win on Saturday night was the fact that they have the luxury of being able to just basically put Xavier Tillman straight up on Jalen Smith, leave him on an island. You don't have to cheat, you don't have to help, you don't have to do anything. Rocket Watts can basically do the same on a guy like Anthony Cowan, and suddenly you don't have to leave Wiggins. You don't have to leave Morcell. You don't have to leave any of these guys. So they're still going to take 3-point shots. They're just going to be bad 3-point shots as long as they're defend. Like, you can defend Maryland at the 3-point line. They're still going to shoot them. It's a matter of not giving them open looks because they're not a particularly good 3-point shooting team despite their volume. So that was why Michigan State was so effective. Michigan doesn't really replicate that. So, you do have to defend. You do have to send help on guys, especially when Jalen Smith is on the perimeter. You have to play completely different than Michigan State can. So, how does that look? We will see. I agree with you that Maryland is definitely showing some of its kind of warts here down the stretch. But it's a huge week for that program. I mean, it's, for them to go win, I don't know if it's more important for them to actually win the league as opposed to just not losing what at one point looked like an inevitable, banner for that program. So, this would be brutal for them to somehow miss out on getting a share. And it's tough because they're going to be playing at Rutgers on Tuesday and what will probably be one of the biggest games in that building in forever. And then a home game against Michigan.
And that pressure is on because Michigan State went into College Park and won on Saturday. Should we talk a little bit about that game?
We should. I was there.
You were there. Immediate takeaway. You're not bringing the energy. You are salty that we lost our last podcast.
I am a little salty.
Need to get into this. I'm mad too, but you got to give the people what they want.
Yeah, it was a terrific performance by Michigan State. It was. I was most impressed by the fact that they were able to go into a place like College Park, win a game like that, and it wasn't on the back of Cassius Winston delivering some otherworldly performance where you say, well, hot damn, if he plays like that, they can beat anyone. No,
he did make 5 of 6 threes.
He was good. No, and he was really good. That corner three was unbelievable. I'm just saying, like, it was not this just him and Tillman. You got Rocket Watts, you got Malik Hall, you got Aaron Henry was outstanding in that game, and no one was really talking about it. My favorite sequence of the night for Michigan State was when on one possession, on a spot that Maryland had to get a basket down the stretch to try to it was their last push to make it a game. Aaron Henry 1-on-1 against Jalen Smith gets a block from behind after bodying him up, and then on the ensuing possession takes Anthony Cowan 1-on-1 and just smothered him, forced him into a bad shot, and got a stop. I mean, how many, you can probably count on one hand the amount of guys in this league, maybe even the country, I would say this league, that could do that could show that level of defensive versatility. And, that's what Aaron Henry gives them. So, was Malik Hall's performance a mirage? I don't know, but you got more from everyone, and that's the difference between Michigan State being a Sweet 16 team and being a Final Four team. It was proven last year. Matt McQuaid, Kenny Goins were the difference between that team going to the Final Four or not.
Yeah, so
I again unloaded a lot for you.
All season, we've talked about the 2 and the 4 are the big question mark with this Michigan State team. You never know what you're going to get. Well, I'm going to tell you, if you get 29 points from those 2 guys, you're going to win more than you're going to lose, right? Like, the question is, I don't know that that can also come up with 5 points in 50 minutes between those 2 guys, right? Like, you don't know what you're going to get from Rocket and Malik Hall in any given day. And that gives you upside. It gives you potential, but it's also been one of the reasons that this Michigan State team has been so frustrating and hard to figure out.
And at the same time, though, like, I don't know if you need 29 points from those. Like, you know what I mean?
Because you need something. You can't say that, well, the difference in this game was that Michigan State had all these other things. Well, having those other things is what you need, and you don't always get it. And
but Cassius still also turned the ball over 7 times. Like, they weren't. You see what I'm saying here, right? Like, the fact that there was this balanced attack that I do think is more replicable than the Cassius Winston show being what you're relying on every night. So,
But are you getting the Cassius Winston show because you choose that channel, or are you getting it because Rocket Watts is off and struggling and you don't have another option, right? Like,
well, I also think that Rocket is turning a corner.
I
where
completely agree.
I think his medium is much different than what it was. I think the days of him just completely going off and shooting you, or being a detriment on offense, are starting to come out of view. Could there still be a performance like that? Of course, but I think he gets it a little bit more. So, and like Kyle Arnes can give you some of what Malik Hall did. Like it doesn't need to be all or nothing.
So in February, Watts had games of 13 points. So that was at Maryland. 21 points, and 16 points. He also had a 3-point game at Nebraska where he was 1 of 8 from the floor with 4 turnovers. He scored 5 points in the home game against Maryland, 1 of 8 from the floor. He scored 7 points against Michigan. He scored 6 points against Penn State. He scored the 16 at Wisconsin. He needed, 13 shots, right? So he is not necessarily consistent. And if you notice, when you get those good stat lines, you're usually winning the game. And when you get the game at Maryland or the game at Michigan or one of those, right, like you're not getting the same sort of upside and the whole product suffers. Like he can win you 3 games in March by himself. He can also lose you a game with his sort of irrational confidence or overconfidence, whatever you want to call it. I think that's what makes him so valuable, but also it's just like, how do you get that exact right amount of Rocket Watts in any given moment?
Right. So I don't disagree at all. And you wonder what is confidence going to do, because, now he's cooking with gas these last 2 games. He could go out and put up.
I don't think he needed confidence.
How many shots does he put up at Penn State after these 2 games? We'll see. But I just think watching him on the court, watching him interact with guys, watching the decisions that he makes, the same step that he made. You made a great point last night, like about how he came back from that injury and how he was a different player from the beginning of the year. Like that was one massive step forward. I just think here toward the end of the year, he's taking another step forward, right? And it does take blocks of time and games to do these things. This is how players develop. And, Rocket is clearly that way. Could he, have a terrible game in a Sweet 16 game and they lose? Of course, 100%. But first of all, he ain't coming off the court because his defense is incredible at this point.
Yeah, and I completely agree that he's improving, showing signs of turning that corner, and he's been playing well. It's just he's still a bit of a question mark what you're going to get in any given day. Malik Hall is even more dramatic. Malik Hall scored double digits twice, the 2 best wins of the season for Michigan State, and he also he had 2 baskets over the last 4 games before the game in Maryland. Like if Malik Hall did that against Michigan State, he would be mentioned in Tom Izzo's press conference as this guy came in and went 5 of 5 from the floor, and who the hell is this guy, right? Like what is he?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Like he's that guy. So is he a guy you can trust to give you that? I don't know. I think the 4 is still a question mark for this team, despite the fact that he played so well.
It is, but having him see the ball go in, have him get a degree of confidence, I would think, hope, imagine that this is it. With
if it is,
with the
it
lineup
changes everything.
This is it. Well, just with the lineup changes alone, like just cut that shit out. This is your starting lineup, right? Kyle Arnes is going to be your kind of fill in on whatever you basically need. Gabe Brown gets you some minutes here and there. If you want to still use Foster to spell, I would just go with Rocket as the backup one on those moments. But against in these last 2 games, sure, whatever. And that's it, really. So we've had so many conversations about when are they just going to kind of get a level of straight role definitions, and like I would think this game you have to just be like, okay, lock in, this is what it is and this is what you ride. You can't keep going with we're going to start Marcus Bingham in this game and see what he gives you and you have no idea. I think you just lock down on this. Do you agree with that?
I do think that you have to just go with one lineup and try to make that work, because if you're juggling things around, you run the risk of coming up with the wrong combination on the wrong day. I think you'd rather just build toward one approach.
Mm-hmm.
I also think the narrative that Michigan State is like back is bullshit. Like Michigan State has been the same team all along, and people are just losing their mind a little bit when they lost those 4 out of 5 games. Michigan State's been the best team in the Big Ten throughout the Big Ten season. This is why we said Michigan State was going to win at Maryland. I don't think it was much of an upset. Did you know that was the first time Michigan State was an underdog all season?
I did. Well, I mean, I knew it once Austin tweeted it.
Good stat.
Kyle Austin, shout out.
The Michigan State's outscoring Big Ten teams by 9.5 points per 100 possessions.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think's second in efficiency margin in the Big Ten?
Second in efficiency margin in the Big Ten.
So just in conference games.
I will say Wisconsin.
No, Ohio State. So, and Ohio State's outscoring teams by 4.4 points per 100. So there's it's a 5-point gap.
Mm-hmm.
And the gap between Wisconsin and Ohio State and every other team that can make the NCAA tournament basically is 5 points. So there's the gulf in class of how much better this Michigan State team should be than the rest of the Big Ten is what every analytic will tell you. That's why they're 7th in KenPom now.
7th in KenPom. And to even cement that point, even while people were freaking out, they fell out of the AP poll at one point. They have never been lower than 11 on KenPom.
So trust in KenPom.
Right.
It's people lose sight of that fact. Just again, it comes down to sequencing, and you think a team is bad when they lose 3 games in a row, but teams are going to lose games, right? Like, what was Michigan State at this point last year? They were 23-6, so they're 3 losses off that pace, right? Like, and that was a great Michigan State season. I like Michigan State to go into,
and it was a different Big Ten. But go ahead.
It was, and I wonder how much of it. I guess obviously, like Michigan State was preseason number 1. You're expecting them to go 30-1 or something like that, because that's what great teams do. But I think this team is still perfectly positioned to make a run in the NCAA tournament. I think you still have Cassius Winston, you still have Xavier Tillman. I also think they're going to go and they're going to win 2 games this week at Penn State and against Ohio State at home.
I agree. I think it's a 2-0 week for Michigan State. I think at this point, it's been so hard to just kind of lock down on what have been the reasons for some of these losses when they would just do inexplicable things kind of down the stretch in games. But it does take some bad lessons the hard way to understand how to execute in the last 4 or 5 minutes of games. And that is a difference here. And you almost saw it at Maryland, by the way. I don't know if they're completely past that. There were some bad moments down the stretch where, if you do that shit in a NCAA tournament game, it can bite you. You can piss away a game down the stretch. So, the turnovers are still there. You want to see them get wiped a little bit more. But this team, and I say that expressively, the 5 that are on the floor when it matters, I think they have learned or are learning how to win games, and that's going to be the difference. Close games. They beat the piss out of everyone that they won basically for a lot of this year. It's different playing when you're up 5 with 5 minutes to go than when you're up 15 with 5 minutes to go.
Here's the secret. Teams that struggle, like what you're explaining, teams that struggle to win close games are actually just better teams than everyone thinks. They're consistently undervalued. And a team like Auburn that wins 5 overtime games in a row, it's not somehow magical in close games. It's just lucky for a bit, and it's probably not as good as its win-loss record says. And that's kind of what's going on with Michigan State. If you're losing a game on the last couple of possessions and winning every game by a lot, that actually means you're a really good team. You just didn't win those few close games, right? It's one thing if you're getting smoked, but really Michigan State has only had one awful loss, which was that Purdue game, right? I mean, just blown out.
Well, here's the thing, though. You would make the case, though. Like, they were so clearly better than Maryland in that first matchup. And, like, how do you lose a 9-point lead with 2 minutes left?
Sometimes shit happens.
I understand that, but it was terrible. That was a terrible loss, and a lot of it was self-inflicted.
Sometimes shit happens.
Point being here, right? Rocket Watts knows not to leave a guy like Anthony. Like, he learned those lessons in that game by experience. Those things happen to good teams. And that's how good teams become great teams.
I agree with that. Okay. I just think that it gets a little lost in the shuffle of that Michigan State's actually just a good team. And it's been a good team all along. That's my only point there.
And now they get a second straight chance to avenge a game that they probably should have won. They lost that game to Penn State on February 4th, so just under a month ago. It'll basically be a month to the day. What do you think about this matchup? Ken Palm has Penn State winning by 1.
Yeah, so Penn State, not great. Penn State's sort of that situation we're talking about where they're sort of renowned for winning some of those close games and the toughness they've shown to win at Michigan State. I think that they're a little bit overrated as far as their record. They're probably closer to the middle of the pack in the Big Ten, is what all the numbers would tell you. I don't really see Penn State as a team that's going to make a run down the stretch. I'm really worried about how much they foul all the time. And I think a motivated Michigan State with everything to play for, avenging a loss, it seems like a spot where you look at Michigan State to just go into the Bryce Jordan Center and take care of business. But Penn State also was without Miriam Jones. That helps. He came back against Iowa, probably still getting back into the flow of things after you miss a couple weeks with illness. But I don't know. I like Michigan State in this spot.
The thing that worries me most about Penn State, ready? 3 for 9, 11 for 24, 3 for 11, 7 for 15. Those are Lamar Stevens' 2-point shot attempts in the last 4 games. It looks a lot like junior year Lamar Stevens, and for a lot of the time this year, it was not that. And whether, I mean, just look at the number, look at his efficiency numbers, just in terms of shots. I don't know if it's a bad spell. I don't know if I'm not around Penn State enough to know, whether he is trying to overdo things or what it is, or if he's just missing shots. But that is, they go as he goes, and they have a lot of nice pieces, but he is still, he is such a, whatever you people would call it, high usage or whatever.
You people.
They're just so dependent on him. He takes 30% of Penn State shots that if he's not on, they're off. It's really hard for them to win without him playing well.
And he did play well at Michigan State.
Absolutely. He was great.
So can you remind me how Michigan State defended him in the first matchup?
I don't remember. I think I want to say Aaron Henry, but I might be wrong.
Yeah,
that would be what I would do.
Yeah, I feel like it wasn't as much Aaron Henry for some reason, but I could be misremembering. Here's the thing about Penn State. I don't think they're a great three-point shooting team, and they have had these games where they just go crazy from three-point range, and then they have games where they just don't make threes. So you run that risk of if they get hot, they can just run away with the game. And the one matchup issue for Michigan State is that Penn State will turn you over, and Michigan State usually struggles with turnovers, right? So do you wonder, you can't make those. Penn State is very well equipped to capitalize on turnovers, right? They're going to steal the ball from you, live ball turnover, break out the other way, and then things can spiral out of control a little bit up there. But I still just think that Michigan State is the better team by a pretty good margin, and it seems like a similar spot to the Maryland game for me.
Agreed. What chances are you putting on a Michigan State getting another piece of the pie? So you're saying 2-0 week is undoubtedly a Big Ten championship.
I think so. Do you think Maryland goes 2-0 this week?
No.
No. Are you going to bet on Mark Turgeon to seal the deal here? I don't think so.
You don't walk into the rack and get out alive, man. Unless you're Michigan and Rutgers is playing terribly.
Could be a fun setup where Michigan State fans have to root for Michigan to beat Maryland.
Absolutely.
To then win the Big Ten, and Michigan could win other teams a share of the Big Ten by winning. A whole lot of useless drama there, but that could definitely be the situation because the Maryland-Michigan game is before the Michigan State game, I believe. Mm-hmm. I think we looked that up last night.
And before all of that is Wisconsin-Indiana.
True.
Wisconsin also playing potentially for a share.
Yeah, I like Wisconsin to finish 2-0, despite kind of a rocky finish there against Minnesota on Sunday night. Wisconsin is just kicking ass. And then this team, ever since they lost Kobe King, they've been incredible. So sometimes you need something like that to shake up a team, and Wisconsin's just as hot as any team in the country. They have a real chance to finish, 10-1 or 9-1 in their last 10 games. Yep. I mean, that's a hell of a stretch in a league that is supposed to be so great.
There's probably there's probably a 15% chance, we'll say, of Michigan State going 2-0, Wisconsin going 2-0, Maryland going 0-2. Say Michigan goes into Xfinity and gets a win in that game. It's not completely out of the question that after all of this year, it ends up with a Michigan State, or Michigan State, Wisconsin co-champions, Maryland alone in second. Would be pretty incredible.
I mean, hell, Wisconsin could win an outright Big Ten championship, and there's 1 week left in the season. Yep. They were 5-5 at one point.
Right.
That's crazy.
Right.
I mean, we probably did a buy-sell podcast on Wisconsin a couple months ago and probably said, no way. Like, what is this team? Mm-hmm. But does that make you think the Big Ten is good, or does it make you think maybe the Big Ten is actually crappy? That's what I keep coming back to.
I mean, I still think that this league puts 4 teams in the Sweet 16, 3 or 4 teams in the Sweet 16. If I had a bet today, I'd say 4.
I put the over-under at 3.
I'll take the over.
Yeah.
Now, is there a Final Four team? I have no idea. I wouldn't bet on that.
How would you rank? Who would be your top 3 Big Ten teams that could make a run to the Final Four?
Oh, God. I hate this question. Okay. Michigan State is 1. I'll take... God damn. Literally a week ago, I probably would have said Michigan, too. And now I have no idea. Michigan State, Wisconsin. I guess Maryland.
I'll go Michigan State, Ohio State, Michigan.
Yeah, I sold Ohio State a while back, so I'm not allowed to double back on that.
I've been in on Ohio State, so I'm just buying more and more and more. Give me all the Buckeye stock. I think they're a sneaky good team that people just aren't paying any attention to, really. I mean, they're 8-2 in their last 10. I think losing DJ Carton was a bit of addition by subtraction. Not that he was a bad player or anything, just everyone has a role now. I mean, CJ Walker was incredible in that game yesterday. He killed Michigan in the mid-range. He got to his spots. He drove and kicked. Like, he was great running that team in a way that I don't think he had the confidence to really get to early in the season. And now he's the guy, and their team just works for me. I don't know. I think that team is way better than anyone really realizes right now.
So in the Penn State-Michigan State game, Hall started on Stevens. Then Tillman was on him, and Aaron Henry got him a tiny bit. So there you go. That's why we didn't remember who it was, because it was 3 different guys.
Yeah, because I feel like on the podcast before that, you swore that it would just be Henry the whole time, and I remember it being a lot of like Malik Hall and other situations where I Lamar Stevens is just such a tough dude to cover because he can take you inside. He can kind of face he can do so many different things, or sometimes he'll just jack 20 mid-range jumpers and miss all of them. But like you look at how they played at Michigan, he started hitting those, and then what do? You're just screwed.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it is his senior night, I believe, in State College, right?
Yeah, Penn State doesn't have 2 home games, right?
No, so that is another little narrative. I know you like to ride that narrative wave.
It's fair. Any other seniors on that roster? Let's see. Lamar Stevens, Mike Watkins, Curtis Jones. That would be it.
Yeah, you were trying to drum up a senior day narrative somewhere else, and last night when there was no seniors on a team's roster, I think that was a good one.
I thought that podcast was never to be spoken of again.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It was a lot better than this one. Any other Big Ten takes?
Yeah,
you want to talk bubble?
Let's talk bubble.
Let's talk bubble.
On the way out here. This is the good stuff here.
The Big Ten bubble right now, Rutgers, Purdue, Indiana, and we'll be polite and list Minnesota.
Oh, Dylan. We haven't been recording.
You're kidding me.
No.
You're kidding.
I'm kidding. Okay, go ahead.
You're feeling especially cruel today.
Okay. So, all right, go. Continue your point on the bubble.
No, you have to lead the bubble talk now.
So, I mean, this is fascinating to actually see how this works out. I think would you say we've been in agreement for most of this time that the Big Ten ends up with 10?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that was our take.
So,
for a while.
Now, coming down to it, with everyone having 2 games left, I believe, you're looking at Rutgers, Purdue, Indiana, maybe to a certain extent Minnesota, but probably not, barring something crazy, are basically vying for those final spots. And everyone got... So Rutgers finishes home against Maryland, and then at Purdue. Purdue finishes at Iowa and home against Rutgers. Indiana finishes, I believe it's the only team in the league with 2 home games remaining. Obviously a huge advantage. Home against Minnesota, home against Wisconsin, and then the boys from Minnesota go to Indiana and home against Nebraska.
So here's the problem for the Big Ten.
Oh, shit. Yep.
I think there's a chance all these teams could play their way out of the NCAA tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Purdue loses at Iowa but beats Rutgers. Indiana loses to Minnesota but beats Wisconsin. Like, there's just like all these none of these teams are playing particularly well, and they all need to win some games, right? And like Purdue and Minnesota have just managed to be like relevant enough to every time you want to write them off, they come back and win. Who do you think gets in at this point? Like, the Rutgers is just, they're in a danger zone. They are just kind of watching this whole thing fall apart slowly, and they need a little bit of magic this week, and they have 2 really tough games. I mean, Maryland is playing for a Big Ten title. They're coming in. You haven't played that well of late. That's tough. And then you go to Purdue, who's playing for a bid also, right? Like, it's tough.
So this might differ from... I still think there's a decent chance all 3 get in.
It's possible.
No doubt. I mean, if Indiana wins its last 2 home games, it's in. Obviously, that is by no means a guarantee. If Rutgers beats Maryland on Tuesday, that could probably push them pretty safely in, barring a terrible showing in one game in the Big Ten. And Purdue, I mean, you said it earlier, right? Trust Ken Palm. That this is a team that has never dropped below 31. In Ken Palm's rating is currently at 25, and they finish at Iowa and home against Rutgers. I think there's a chance that they go 2-0. They go and steal a game or 2 in Indy. They're in.
Yeah, if they go 2-0 this week, they're in. And that's a tough. I mean, Iowa's good at home. That's tough. I think they beat Rutgers and they get to 9 conference wins. I don't know if that's enough.
My question here is, like, I think 2 of the 3 end up getting in based on the fact that some teams have to make this tournament, right? We have the same conversation every year, and the Big Ten is just most equipped to grab those extra spots. Some of these guys might be going through Dayton, but they will be in. My question is, who do you trust the least out of these teams to do what we're asking of them in terms of trying to get as many bids as possible?
I trust the team that has to do the least. I think Indiana has the easiest road, and I'm the most worried about them.
Beating Wisconsin, the hottest team in the league.
At home.
In a game where Wisconsin is playing for potentially a Big Ten championship.
On Devontae Green's senior night?
That's the easiest? That's the easiest road? You sure about that?
2 home games is the easiest road.
Okay.
Who has the easier road?
I think you can make a case that Purdue
has to go to Iowa. Get out of here. No, but I think Indiana loses one of these 2 games. I think there's too much pressure. I think Indiana is also the worst team of that group. Like, they're not actually very good, and that's why I don't trust them to win games, even if they might be narrow favorites.
I trust the most. The team that I trust the most is Purdue because of the coach. And the team that I trust the least is most definitely Indiana. And like the fact I'm giddy thinking about next Monday and looking at this Big Ten tournament bracket, because it is going to be absolutely fascinating if some of these teams can find a way to cross paths and almost play themselves into a play-in into the first 4. Like, yes, give that to me on a platter, please.
Yeah,
I will cover that game like it's the goddamn national championship.
Indiana has the 2 home games and then the Big Ten tournament in Indianapolis. So
yes, it's
all right there for Archie Miller and company. But I can't get on board with this Indiana team.
No,
they're 3-7.
Indiana fans can't get on board with this Indiana team.
They had a chance there at Illinois. Like, if you could have stole that win, you're in. But you worry that was like the good performance. So, like, did you waste that? Right? Yeah. What if bad Indiana comes out this week, and then where are you at?
And before we get out of here, we should we talked bubble. We should talk the other way, because we just had that entire conversation about teams getting shares of the Big Ten championship and blah 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 blah, and did not even mention Illinois, which has just refused to go away. They finish at Ohio State, obviously huge ask to go in there and win right now the way Ohio State's playing, and then home against Iowa. But to its absolute credit, Illinois still right in the thick of things after they had their own 4-game losing streak where everyone kind of was ready and willing to write them off and responded with the schedule obviously fell pretty favorably with those back-to-back Nebraska-Northwestern games. But here we are. It's March 2nd, and Illinois can still get a share of the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, they have the toughest path to get to
most definitely
14 wins, but I mean, they've also have some of the best road wins in the conference, so you can't completely write them off. I still don't love Illinois as far as like long-term prospects to make a deep NCAA tournament run, but heck of a season, and for them to even be here is a pretty big accomplishment. Like, if you think back to when we did like talking about preseason rankings and stuff, there are a few outlier people I think who picked Illinois somewhat high, but this is
Graham Couch.
Where are you at? Underwood has
Stand
to be
up, Graham.
Coach of the Year candidate, right? In the Big Ten?
Yeah. He's a National Coach of the Year candidate, according to people who make such lists.
Who would you say is the Coach of the Year?
In the Big Ten?
Yeah.
Oh. Well,
especially if a couple losses arrive in College Park this week.
Well, here's the if Penn State beats Michigan State tomorrow night, then they would finish at Northwestern. I would have a hard time not giving that to Chambers. They would be 13-7 in the league with a sweep of Michigan State. Considering what that program is, like, I would give him the Big Ten Coach of the Year as a lifetime achievement award for what he's, gone through there.
That's fair. If Underwood finishes 14-6, though,
right? I agree. I agree. I mean,
he's got to be in that conversation.
It's coming right down the line. It wasn't long ago where we were talking about how it would be, everyone was going to look for guys like Chambers and, the old, hey, this team performed better than expected, so that guy's the Coach of the Year, instead of just saying Maryland was the best team for most of the year. They won an outright title. How do you not give it to Mark Turgeon? Like, totally
I agree with that too.
Right, legit case to be made there. God damn, I mean, if Michigan State wins, I know they were picked to finish the league, but what they have navigated this year, you could make a case for him.
No, you're not preseason number one and then finishing a 3-way tie.
I understand, but
that's not Coach of the Year season.
You and I also have the perspective of knowing what has happened in that program for the last 3 months, and I don't think any coach has navigated the things that Izzo has navigated.
I mean,
I'm just saying you can make a case, right? I'm just making cases for everyone here, and it speaks to what's been the balance. Like, God, if Wisconsin gets a share, you just made the case. I mean, they were 5-5, and he found a way, and a lot of it has to do with they figured things out. They figured out, okay, Reuvers can't play with Micah Potter, so now they're going to split them up, and they found a way to make it work. It's been a pretty damn good coaching job from Greg Gard too.
I think that goes without. Yeah, he'd be up in my top 3. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to put him up there.
I think we have
especially
to wait
if they win a share.
Yeah, like this time next week, we'll be doing our postseason awards pod with our all league teams, Player of the Year, Coach of the Year. There should be a lot of debate. That's a good one. That's one of our favorite shows of the year.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Hopefully it records.
To be fair, the podcast did record. The audio quality was just completely terrible. You're making it sound like this was like a complete error on my part. It was just speaks to my lack of ability as a producer more than lack of attention to detail.
Fair.
If we get out of here, this is not our best work.
Let's wrap it up. All right. We appreciate everyone listening. Be sure to rate and review this podcast if you have kind things to say, and if you don't, you can keep them to yourself. Subscribe to UM Hoops. Dylan has great stuff over there. Subscribe to The Athletic. Lots of good stuff on the way that I'm looking forward to everyone seeing. So that'll do it for this week. Be sure to tip your bartenders and your servers.